Good afternoon. Welcome to the Transportation and Logistics panel. We have a group of people that are well-versed in transportation and logistics. We have great Guido Grease from Doxer, who's the MD of the Americas for Doxer, Greg Smith, who is a vice president at Tech Mahindra. We have Andrew Gillespie from Ansel Healthcare Products, Jason Walker from Performance Team, Fernando Haddad, who is with Matron, and we have Joe Corderola with Empire Worldwide. And I think I got everybody. So one of the things is moderator, I'm just gonna try to set the stage for the panelists to make their comments and their point of view. But everybody, and I'm sure in many of the sessions, people have been talking about black swans, which are rare, unpredictable events which have serious and unavoidable side effects. And the pandemic we've all experienced obviously disrupted the supply chain substantially. And then if we look at a black swan versus a gray rhino, a gray rhino, people see that it's obvious it's coming toward you. So people try to take preventative measures to stop the gray rhino from disrupting things. So really the big difference is the approach to a black rhino versus a gray swan, a gray rhino versus a black swan. So when you look at it, leadership in a black swan, they don't do anything. They take accountability once the effect has occurred, like the pandemic. If it was a gray rhino, management looks ahead before the event happens, and they actually take action to prevent it. So one of the ways to look at this is a public health analogy that my daughter taught me. And she said that there was a situation where there were a lot of people drowning. So immediately in this river, immediately people started going out there with their boats and rescue people to rescue this person drowning. But the longer they were out there, more people kept coming down. So they had to get more boats, more people to rescue these people, and more ambulances. Until somebody had the bright idea, let's go upstream and find out what's causing all these people to be in the river drowning in the first place. So he found that there was a bridge upstream, which all the pedestrians used to use to cross the river, and it had collapsed. And as a result, people still tried to cross the river, they fell in, and that's why the drownings were happening. So in one situation, people were focused on the response. In the other situation, where the guy went upstream to see what was going on, he focused on the prevention. And this analogy really applies to supply chain too, in that it was a black swan and the pandemic happened, but could have companies foreseen this and done a gray rhino on it and done some prevention prior to the pandemic? So in a black swan, you wait till the effect happens, so then you wait and see, and then you take action. In a gray rhino, you see the situation happening before the event happens, and you try to avoid it and therefore thrive. So what happened in this supply chain in this most recent pandemic? You saw a black swan. And so what happened? Inventory ran out. There was no space in the retailers because they weren't designed to have warehouse and extra inventory on site. There was delivery truck and labor shortages, not only that, but also in the distribution centers. They had the wrong inventory in those distribution centers. People had gone to centralized manufacturing, primarily in China, to get longer production runs and thus lower their unit cost. And so there was very highly concentrated sourcing. There was a loss of control of the demand because obviously the demand changed very quickly, and there was limited access to raw materials, the right raw materials. So all of this ended up in one sense with a lot of more inventory, but of the wrong items. So this chart just kind of shows historically from 2000 to June 2020, historically the level of inventory. And what I just wanted to highlight was you can see the red arrow there, how high it spiked. And it is, again, not that this was just the wrong inventory. And a lot of people found that their demand completely dried up. So with that in mind, and that's setting the stage, I'm going to turn it over to the panel to begin talking. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cover a number of topics. And Andy's going to talk about supply chain strategy that you might want to implement some options. Fernando's going to talk a little bit about flexible supply chains, cost versus risk. We're going to have, let me just make a quick adjustment here. How you might build a digital supply chain management model so that you can better manage your supply chain. Jason is going to talk a little bit about omnichannel and how people with omnichannel were able to better react to the situation. And then Guido is going to talk about some of the implications and things that people can do with their supply chain. And then Joe is going to talk about the transportation and the outlook for ocean freight and using some of the data that's available out there. And finally, we'll take questions. So with that, we'll move on to the strategy. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy Gillespie, who's the Director of Global Logistics at Ansell Healthcare Products. And they make a lot of PPE. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy because he's got a lot of experience and they went through some troubles, but came out the other side. And Andy's going to tell you how they did it.
Thank you very much, Gene, and thanks for the introduction. Ansell Healthcare Products is very heavy in the PPE space, more so in the protective gloves area. What we call exam gloves or single-use gloves are a big component of our portfolio. We are a global manufacturer and a global seller of these products. So we have a global footprint for this. So what we faced in our various production areas in Asia, and then trying to get the product out to the other, what we call our market regions, North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, as well as the Latin America. It was quite challenging. So to kick off the little story, we also make protective suits. The disposable suits that you will use in a virus condition, for instance. We make a lot of those. Most of those we actually make in China, in Xiamen, China. Early in the process, I remember it very distinctly, was my birthday and was also the first day of Chinese New Year. In China, everyone goes out for holiday, and the first day of Chinese New Year is well, what we in the US would consider our Thanksgiving Day. All the families together on the first day of Chinese New Year. Our factory had to get back to work on that very day. So the management was called in by the government. They said 21st of January, get back to work. I'm sorry, it was a couple days after that. So it was the Saturday of Chinese New Year, the first day. Get back to work. You have to start production right away. Forget your 2-week shutdown for Chinese New Year. And they did. They had to get back to work. And they had a lot of workers, a lot of key workers that were spread out around China who couldn't get back to Xiamen. The government said, don't worry, we'll find you employees. They had to get back to work with new people, get into full production to make these protective suits. They had to also, in a few weeks, figure out how to set up their factory and their processes to protect their employees. They figured they had to figure out social distancing before we were talking about social distancing. How many employees they could actually bring in, who's working home, who's coming in the office, what shifts, what parts of the factory you can go or you couldn't go. They had to figure all this stuff out. So that showed us how serious the situation was. A few weeks after that, our factories started to shut down in other places, in Sri Lanka, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and other places, because the virus was spreading. So by the end of March, those other factories, also essential products, making protective gloves, had to get back to work. But the governments had shut them down. So they had to prove to the governments that they were essential, which was the first tick. The second thing is they had to prove to each one of the governments, they had to get certified that they could get up and operating safely at half staff or less. And then they were allowed to reopen. Each one was closed at least 2 weeks. We lost that production of very essential products. This is what they did to react to that, though. They started making the most basic products they could because they figured they could make many, many more millions of pieces of gloves, for instance, if they made the basic things, the protective product, without the frills, without any special considerations or surgical considerations, things like that. So they didn't make the fancy things. They made less variety and more basic so they could produce more. And they got up and running. All right, so we know that the shipping lines worked pretty well, but we had ports at these places like in Malaysia and Sri Lanka, for instance, and in China that were slowed down. They had slowed down. They couldn't get workers back either, and they had to prioritize. They prioritized PP. In China, we had to actually get government escorts to move containers out to our factories to load the containers to get back to the ports. And as I made a comment earlier this week that I had heard someone say how fragile the supply chain of the world is. And it's like that, it isn't the case. The supply chain did slow down, it did get affected, but it was back up and running again. I mean, this is the spaghetti string of different supply chains kept moving and we kept transporting product. But we had to learn how to change.
Okay, perfect. All right, so maybe we can switch now to Fernando. And what is the case for flexible supply chains, cost versus risk? And Fernando is the current Senior Vice President of Transformation for Materion. He's had extensive experience with companies like Honeywell and Dow Corning. So I'll turn it over to Fernando.
Yes, thank you, Gene. Yes, and the intention here is to talk about how to adjust the operating model of your company for a more flexible manufacturing and transportation organization. Well, you can see in this slide that in the past decades, in fact, companies have migrated to this more centralized manufacturing organization. And most of the times they moved to Asia, especially China. And despite some attention to risks, clearly the scale was way heavier on the cost side, which leads to many questions and concerns. And Gene, if you can, thank you. Point is that this reduced cost model does not really come for free. There are complicating factors that come into play, and you must be mindful of those factors. So need to bring them to surface and have an intelligent discussion with the decision makers in a company. So some of the questions that you could ask as you have this dialogue are like those you see here. And is supply chain robustness, resilience, flexibility, like Andy just touched on, now more important than the supply chain cost efficiency? What about if you are a buyer, a company buying? Do you want to have all your eggs in just one basket, or would you like to single source? Or position, if you do not single source, can you still compete? What about considering geographic sourcing, buying locally in each region, Asia, Europe, Americas? Are there countries that, given their behaviors, higher risk behaviors, in fact, displayed during this COVID situation crisis, should they be, considered, as a supplying country to your company? If you are producing and a supplier, is this one of those few moments in history that you should stop and think about on sourcing, onshoring, manufacturing, production that you had and your supply chains? There are many countries doing that. The US is supporting companies to onshore, Germany, Japan. So this is a game that is in play right now. Should you consider supply chain flexibility or lack of flexibility an enterprise risk? Those that get to the board level of your company. Remember, the board of directors, they have some duties with investors. Transparency, loyalty, they are there to protect investors and not the company. So they need to be aware of how flexible your supply chain is or is not to protect investors. Next slide, Gene, please. All these complications, they come into play, no doubt, and there's no one size fits all, but a potential solution is then to try to adjust, your company's operating model to a more flexible, decentralized manufacturing organization with a consistent risk management system. You have to have those in place. Of course, the importance of risk management has already increased so much in the past few years. Needless to say that many of us, if not all, remember back in 2011, the tsunami in Japan, the Fukushima power plant, and how disruptive that event was for many of us, or our companies. What about the 2018 Hurricane Michael hitting Florida? I had a plant in Florida, in Panama City, that was almost completely destroyed. Distillation towers down. So it's a situation that you have to stop and think and say, okay, what is it that I could have done better? What type of risk management actions I could have in place? Should I have, previous to the hurricane season, thought about the planning, looking at those key materials that are supplied to key suppliers and have them produced in advance and stored someplace else in the US, not in that coastline. So those, companies face the reality of these dramatic and rapid impacts with a devastating potential. We all know that. And this awareness has accelerated now with COVID. This is a third example, and everybody has that right in front of us. So risk management will strongly shape, processes, landscapes across the entire value chain. I have no doubt about that. And companies must develop playbooks that can quickly be kicked into action and protect, all the stakeholders involved, customers, suppliers. Apart from risk management, adjusting the operating model can be clustered in, I'll say, four categories. And those are, when it comes to processes and organizational design, two of them, we all have to embrace those processes, those organizational designs that allow for remote working. We were basically forced to do that right now. Many of us, here we are, doing that. The other bucket is technology. Technology is an enabler, and we need to go beyond just the basic tools. So look at the Zoom meeting that we're using now. This is important. Most people on the planet are using that to do business. But you have to go beyond that. You have to really think about technologies that allows, for more, I'll say, solutions. Think about robotics, think about, wearables. Again, the general idea is to ensure that you can have things like handle shipping transactions or manipulating data or triggering actions or even taking over physical tasks which were previously done by humans. And once you use technology to do that, you not only lower the error rates, but you really end up with a higher level of reliability in your entire supply chain. That brings the agility, the flexibility, the robustness that we are talking about. And again, allows, of course, for quick responses in times of disruptions, like the ones I just mentioned. Again, this really leads to more robust supply chains. And from a people perspective, again, I mentioned processes, organization, technology, and people. You have to have the right people on the bus. We all heard that. But the point is, you need people that have that proactively explore and adapt to new realities. So having the right skill set and having the agile mindset to embrace these new moments that we have to. And this last slide, Gene, please, if you flip once again, as I said, there's no one size fits all to adjusting your operating model for more flexibility in manufacturing, transportation. But I think that the important thing here is to really properly balance the risks. It's really to have this open dialogue with all levels of the organization up to the board level, as I mentioned, to be able to balance those risks. Many times the solution for a company is a hybrid model where a little bit of, these points that I made are applied. Again, I trust that this will add value to you and your organizations and bring you success. That said, Gene, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Fernando. Now we're going to cover a little bit about supply chain management model that somebody may want to take a look at using as a diagram for the future. And Greg Smith is going to cover that. Greg has had a vast experience in the transportation business with Flying Tigers. He was the head of Qantas Cargo, was part of Oracle's supply chain team, part of IBM's supply chain team, and of late Tech Mahindra. So Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you to help us look at some of the implications that maybe help people, whether they have a robust, flexible, or resilient supply chain, and address some of the issues Fernando brought up, and Andy.
Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it. Yeah, Gene went over my background, but I spent over 20 years on the carrier side of things. And then I spent over 20 years in the IT technology, and in between there, I spent about 8 years in transportation research, primary transportation research. And so I have a very large background. What I really want to talk to you today about is around 5G technologies and how they're going to enable so many of the kinds of things that we're going to be discussing on the panel today. You really can't do all the things that we're going to be talking about that Fernando and all the others have already talked about and are going to talk about unless you have the data. And the data is going to be available to you. I'm going to not speak too much to this because you guys all know what a supply chain is. I want to talk to you about what you're going to need and what is coming. Most of us are used to the whole term 5G. We understand the 5th generation of this technology. And most of you think it sort of applies to your phone. Oh, I got to buy a new iPhone or a new Samsung or whatever it is that you're using, or your tablets. All right. And that's a part of it because those are the sort of the leading parts. They're the first parts of the 5G technology that are available. We've got much faster chips. And we've also got an awful lot bigger pipes being built where we can move faster, vast amounts of data. Okay, so that's going to be great. But what else do we need inside of our supply chains in order to do what we're talking about in terms of modeling and also in running our supply chains in tomorrow's world? And I'm going to go over 4 specific areas for you today. The first one is cloud native 5G technology in the database. That is, brand new databases are being built by all the people that you're used to, SAP and Oracle and those guys, IBM, but also by many other new upstart companies that are building cloud native 5G databases. And they're very significantly different than today's databases. They are designed not to store your data, but to get your data out, to make it available to everybody, to harmonize your data, to build in other kinds of analytics built into the database. So the first thing that's coming are brand new databases that are cloud native, built on 5G technology, but have very, very different structures to your current databases. The second thing is going to be integration platforms. As we look at a supply chain that looks like what you're looking at right this moment, there are many, many different pieces. And as you've been looking at the risk versus cost, versus supply chain optimizations and et cetera, we all have different disparate data sources that are kind of built on different platforms, maybe utilizing different nomenclatures, even different time frames, et cetera. And it kind of makes comparing apples and oranges situation. these integration platforms that will tend to be built around like a commodity type or some sort of category of manufacturing, medical, fresh foods, whatever it might be, any kinds of manufacturing, wearing apparel or this or that. They will be built around that, but they will allow you to take disparate data sources. They may be within your company, but are different sources. All right. They may be different, using different nomenclatures. They may be another part of your outside supply chain. They may not even be in your company, and put your data on a common platform such that you can compare apples to apples. And this will be sub-second response time that these integration platforms are being built that can do this. And they're doing it using things in IT called common connectors. All right. And so that leads you to the third thing. We have BI, business intelligence, machine learning, and of course, artificial intelligence. You're going to have all of your brand new applications that are being built to go into these databases and onto these platforms that are going to have your applications will have the BI, ML, AI built into them, such that when you actually see some of your data, it's actually offering you 3 or 4 options on what you can do and what you need to do right away. And then the fourth piece that is coming, when you're looking at that sort of a situation and you're sharing your data outside of your company so much, all right, you also really bring in security as a major critical force. All right. And the security that is being built today, because basically everything that you're seeing here will be in the cloud. There will be virtually nothing that will be on premise for you anymore as we move greater and greater into 5G. And so the security will be up and is being built up to standards that will allow all of this to take place. So the last thing that I kind of want to go over for you is this concept of a control tower. And I want to utilize an example that is actually out in the marketplace today and being run today. And I think any of you who follow professional golf, particularly here in the United States, but globally, we all know who Tiger Woods is. And he tends to wear a red shirt on every Sunday, all right? There's at least 11 different manufacturers of Tiger Woods red golf shirts for Nike based around the world right today. But today, when somebody places an order for those shirts, it actually goes to a 3PL, all right? And this 3PL is going to take in all of these variables. They're going to look at, first of all, how many is it? And when does it need to be delivered? And to where does it need to be delivered? Then they're going to look at the 11 different manufacturers, all who have contracts with minimum guarantees that Nike guaranteed them. If you make this shirt, I'll give you 500,000 or $1 million or whatever the order number may be. Now, I'll guarantee you that. They'll look at where Nike stands with all of those people. Then they're going to look at where else. If they look at certain places, they're going to see where else Nike's going to ship things in that time frame that is necessary to meet the order. Then they're going to look at their own freight to see what they have. And then that 3PL is going to let out that contract to one of those 11 manufacturers, and that will all be done in a sub-second response time. And that's what a control tower is all about. A control tower is not something that is 100 big, screens up in a room and people pointing at them and making decisions manually. A control tower is a black box enabled by all the kinds of data that I've just been referring to, coming out of cloud native 5G databases, coming out of integrated platforms where we're taking all the disparate data sets, using the built-in BI, ML, AI kinds of technologies, and of course, handling all of the security and the payment and et cetera. So we're just to summarize, we're looking at the 5G technologies that are going to build up speed, quantity of data that can be handled, and of course, reliability. And those are all coming very, very quickly. But what we've just gone over here is something that's going to allow you to do much, much more in your integrated 5G digital supply chains in terms of model building, in terms of responsiveness, and particularly around optimization. Again, just as Fernando was talking, tell you, what the decision should be for you to make the best one. So that's pretty much what I was hoping to go over with you today. And Gene, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Oh, why isn't my
I don't know.
slides-
We
my
never
slides
saw.
aren't advancing.
Oh, we never saw me either. You were on the whole time.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
That's a better look anyway, Gene.
But, oh, there we go. All right, now we're going to talk about B2C supply chains and omni-channel. And Jason's going to take us through how some companies have done better in their resilience and flexibility by having omni-channels. So Jason's been the Senior VP of Operations at Performance Team. Performance Team was recently acquired by Maersk. But Jason has years of experience and has been associated with the USC Supply Chains School for some time. So over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Gene.
Oh, yeah.
It's a privilege to be with the conference today. It's my 6th year of involvement with USC, and grateful for this opportunity. So currently, I manage the day-to-day operations of distribution centers throughout the United States across a large variety of industries, apparel, footwear, house goods, home goods, electronics, and auto parts mainly. And these nodes that I manage with my teams are all the final point before the orders turn to cash, really. They are the point in which transactions to the final customer are made, whether that is a wholesaler, a retail store, or in a higher percentage of our business direct to consumer. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and how we've had to pivot, and talk a little bit about what we've seen with regards to businesses that were set up to be successful. At least they could pivot quicker than others in dealing with the transition to direct to consumer. So here's a graph here. This represents SAP's Commerce Cloud customers' orders profiles for the beginning of this year. You can see that pretty stable first 8 weeks of the year, a bit of growth over 2019. On March 11th, the WHO declared a global pandemic, and the online orders increased by 20.6%. 2 weeks later, that growth was 40.4% and plateaued around 63.3%. At the same time, in these distribution centers, they had to pivot to do direct-to-consumer volume. The volume that was in the distribution centers destined for brick and mortar basically turned off overnight. If you look about, kind of think about what's going to happen into the near future, I found some information from Manhattan Associates. They surveyed 2,500 shippers, and their clients are indicating to them that 90% of their client base prefer online delivery for the next 6 months, and 80% of those surveyed, would like to have digital contact with the store or their provider and not physical contact. And then 28% indicated that they would start to increase time in the brick and mortar stores in the next 6 months. And then there's a Resilien survey in the bottom right here, where they surveyed 5,000 shoppers in August of this year, and 39% of the grouping indicated that they would, post-COVID, balance between online shopping and in-store shopping. But the real number here is 28% indicated they're going to shop online mainly. Gene, if you can switch the slides here.
Okay.
Just more, and this shift in consumption. This data that here is from the Common Thread Collective. It's a marketing firm in Irvine that services small retail resellers, small e-commerce retailers. This data is from 46 of their group, about $100 million worth of business, and you can see the shift to online, or the growth in the online by category here. Of course, medical supplies, home goods, baby products, toys, etc. With 200% growth on the e-commerce side. Revenue growth year over year, we'll just hit that real quick in this grouping, up 173%, spend 117. Return on ad spend up 26.5%, and this indication CPM is return or cost per 1,000 online advertising impressions. That means the cost in which an advertiser is paying to just have it pop up on your screen, right? People are shopping so much online, and the activity is so much online that those to get to 1,000 impressions, you have to spend basically a third less on advertising. So this is changing for us dramatically at the distribution centers that service these industries. The resilient organizations that I've dealt with over the many years have really embraced these 5 strategies over the last 5 years. Number one, they've embraced the idea that their distribution centers need to be omni-channel, meaning they can handle wholesale, retail, or direct-to-consumer orders without issue. And they can pivot from one sales channel to another with ease. They've also embraced the idea that they're going to need a reseller network online, and they have built partnerships with various parties to drive e-commerce or direct-to-consumer fulfillment with their customers. And they've also made sure that their distribution centers have the capability to meet those commitments. They've embraced the idea that they need flexible and expandable distribution centers. We all know every year there's a huge peak season, and you build the church for Easter Sunday, or are you able to put together what is needed for a short period of time to handle those massive influxes and then turn that off so that you can keep it very variable? And we've seen many successful examples in our network where clients have been able to use the technology that we have and processes to do those short window pop-ups and handle those spikes. The other thing that clients have embraced over the last 5 years, in my opinion, is that there is much more customization on the retail and wholesale side to ship to store. The days of carton in, carton out volume at specific price points and product types are now much more customized. And the distribution centers have to have the ability to customize those pick and pack orders and do replenishment in a much more efficient fashion for what consumers are buying in those particular regions of the country. And finally, clearly, many have embraced the idea to fix the roof while the sun is shining when it comes to inventory rationalization, when it comes to SKU proliferation in their networks. They've done a much better job at understanding end-of-life strategies and clearance strategies and leveraging online wholesalers and clearance houses to make sure that their inventory is not getting out of control. The business units that I'm involved with and the organizations that I've been involved with that have done these 5 things have weathered the COVID storm pretty well. Their supply chains have been flexible. They've been able to shift pick and pack resources from retail and wholesale to direct to consumer with relative ease. They were not in over inventory positions going into it. And so they were able to handle some of the inventory issues that were brought upon by COVID. So what's next? What from my point of view, I see moving forward as distribution networks need to be put together, and are some things that we need to think about and embrace as we look at the new networks of the future. Number one, customers today are fairly satisfied with 24 hours deliveries depending on price. That's going to change. I mean, a one-day transit is going to become the standard. Same day is going to be pretty normal in some cases. And that's going to change the way in which distribution centers are placed throughout the United States and the world. And And it's going to tighten the standards of execution within those distribution centers. They're going to have to become much more efficient in order to meet those timeframes and needs. Number two, I'm not sure that the direct-to-consumer and fulfillment ideas of the past, centralized mega warehouses, even by coastal structures and networks, are going to be the answer. They're going to need to be much more regionalized in order to meet the customer's expectations in the future. Smaller, quicker, and more nimble. The next thing is Greg indicated in his presentation, data is everything. If you're going to multiple distribution center network in the US, throughout the world, you need to know when to have the right product in the right place at the right time. And data is going to drive that consumption information. And you know, if you're a mid-level manufacturer or a mid-level brand and you want a competitive advantage, you're going to need to have those products in those areas for people to get very quickly to remain competitive in the future. Embracing robotics is the next thing that will occur. I get to tour many distribution centers throughout the country every year, and I'm still amazed by how manual much of the operations still are. And with higher labor costs today, the shrinking workforce and lower cost of technology, we are going to see in the next 5, certainly the next 10 years, a complete change in robotics and distribution centers throughout the country. And then, you know, finally, we're going to have to embrace in our supply chain planning that the customer of tomorrow is going to have options when they search online for what they want. They're going to ask the question, when can I have it on my porch? Or when can I pick it up and how far away is it? And they will select the provider who can give them that product based on what their needs are going to be. And we are those consumers. So expect, you know, in the future, distribution centers and supply chain networks to be judged on e-commerce by the time in which a customer clicks their mouse until they receive that email that order's been fulfilled, or a measurement of click to fulfill, a measurement of click to the porch, how fast did they get it in their door porch based on when they click their mouse, or when they click their mouse and we're able to go pick it up. All of this and that we're going to see in the future is going to be driven by the need for our clients and our customers to have visibility and reliability throughout their supply chain. And now that supply chain is the end user sitting at home looking for their order online, and they will select the most reliable parties as they choose between different resources to get the goods that they need. So as we look into the future at distribution center networks, in order to be resilient, especially when it comes to general commodities, apparel, footwear, and electronics, the customer demand to have it in real time is going to continue to be a pressure on us. That's all I have, Gene. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you for the insights. All right, we're now going to move to Guido Gries, and Guido is the MD, Managing Director of Air and Sea Logistics for the Americas for Boxer. We were just talking before, Guido was born in Germany, has lived in Asia, has been here for the last 10 years, so he's had a truly global view. Obviously, a lot of the members on this panel have lived in different countries, but Guido sounds like he's lived in 3 continents, and we appreciate him giving his expert insights.
Thank you very much. So I worked indeed in three continents, always for international air freight and ocean freight transportation, freight forwarding. I haven't done anything else, so I'm really dedicated to that for 35 years. And I want to share a little bit the experience we had during the COVID crisis, or still have. So the recent events in the COVID crisis forced most of our workforce to work from home or operate in an environment where we have shifts. And that happened as well for most of our carriers, providers, and partners. And that's obviously not ideal because traditionally our job is very close to the freight. We have still to do a lot of checking, a lot of paperwork to be done. So it's a challenge, but we managed that challenge quite well. So I think in that sense, we have not seen really big disruptions, but things were running in a good way. We felt at the same time that the inbound and outbound shipping on a global scale dropped for us as a company by 30%, and this is tremendous in the second quarter, air freight and ocean freight. At the same time, the belly capacity, what we say in air freight is the passenger flights, where you have the belly which can be filled with freight, dropped as well drastically because most of the airlines canceled their flights. So there was a reduction in air capacity. At the same time, there was as well a reduction of freight from shippers and from consignees and importers. So that somehow was balancing that out. But we get a little taste what is happening if we get a little peak. So we get a peak with the PPE equipment, as we heard before, and prices were going up drastically. So you could see air freight prices for $10 a kilo from Asia, no space, people begging for space just to get cargo on board. And that somehow basically flattened out during the last couple of 2 or 3 months. The price came down again. But this gives you a little bit of taste what would happen if there would be another shock or another event which eventually disrupts transportation and we have to shift to air freight. So there's definitely a weak point which we have to watch. At the same time, we see as well that on the Trans-Pacific and the Transatlantic, the ocean freight carriers reduced or right-sized the capacities with so-called blank sailing. So they leave all the sailing completely, and they reduced as well the schedule. So that creates as well on that end demands when let's say the volumes are picking up. So we see all of a sudden rates going up to the $4,000, $4,500 for a container from Asia, which was maybe last year at $1,200. And I have to tell you, an average value of a container in our organization has something like $50,000. So transportation cost shift of 3 times, 4 times the price than last year makes an impact to some products, and eventually you're not competitive anymore. So you have to watch that as well. Anyhow, most of our customers could fulfill their supply demands, and I think we could manage everything in the right way, but definitely at a higher cost and a reduced speed. And the question as well, the given agility that you can fly from anywhere to everywhere, ship from anywhere to everywhere, to basically mitigate mistakes in planning, that came to a reduced amount. So lean supply chains, which we have, especially in the automotive industry with floating stocks and transit, let's say call it swimming warehouses, increases vulnerability, I think, to certain interruptions, closures of borders, which we had as well, made that as well more extreme. And certainly that has been buffered a little bit by the fact that most of the companies eventually closed down the factories as well, or have reduced production. So anyhow, there's the question coming up, and we can see that already, that there's a certain volume shift from shipments coming not only from China, but now again from Vietnam and from Mexico. And sourcing is coming now from different markets to a certain extent, but not as a big, huge shift. So still China is in the focus, and you can still cargo moving from China in on a very frequent basis. Some industry, due to the interconnectivity nature, cannot make large operational shifts to mitigate such disruptions, as many products are just produced in one country. I just read a McKinsey study. They found that over 180 traded products with a worth of $134 billion US worth, they're traded in a single country. So sometimes you cannot even make big shifts or do dual sourcing. So eventually you get hooked up and have to find other ways and means to optimize the buffers. So what are the takeaways, what we find? We think that building supply chain resilience beyond relocating products is a key task for the management, and it belongs more to the boardrooms. I would say before the crisis, supply chain management was important, but you could not really see it in the boardroom. I think in the future, we see more and more supply chain managers and directors and VPs sitting in the boardroom, making decisions and looking into the risk management, improving transparency, invest into technology, create stronger supply chain transportation networks. Eventually, you hold as well more inventory that we can see as well in our markets. You can count as another takeaway of the flexibility of the global supply chains that we are running. So when there's something happening through the spaghetti knots, what we learned today, I think we can buffer that up. Today it's a little bit more macaroni, not spaghetti, because a lot of shipping line reduce their capacity. So let's say the choices are getting less, but there still is a real robust and solid backbone. Certainly, I think we need to have better collaboration, and this is counting for everybody in the supply chain, and integrate our vendors to become more strategic resource that counts for us, that counts for everybody, instead of just working in a silo, to share information and look eventually into solutions where we can work together jointly for overall great target. And for sure, we need to build more resilient supply chains and make use of opportunities arising from technology. And what you see here on the screen is the R&D technology cycle from our R&D department. This are for us 5 phases: from emerging technology, the hype of technology. We call it the valley of disappointment once you applied, or maybe the expectation is not kicking in. The path of knowledge, and then at the end of the highland of knowledge to really implement that. So I want to highlight 2 technologies which we are presently using within our organization. DAXA is operating a huge road network in Europe. I would say it's the 2nd biggest road network in Europe. We have over 12,000 trucks on the road, over 700 warehouses and offices, which we have to connect with LTL, clean LTL road network with guarantee deliveries, last mile deliveries. So everything what you would know in Europe, in the United States from FedEx and UPS is there on the market, available from DAXA on the LTL market. So we do believe that we started to invest into the 5G low power VLAN. While we found it's a great technology, it's low cost, it's low power usage as well, and on a practical level. So we're equipping our trucks with this low power VLAN for geo positioning, tracking and tracing, and we would use that obviously as well, that data which we have for prognostic for advanced information to manage our inbound cargo in the right way, and for the classification of shipments, so pictures, etc., etc. So another part is machine learning. I would say more machine learning than artificial intelligence. Also, it has the potential to solve tasks which cannot be solved with conventional programming. So in terms of pictures, text, voice recognition, complex amount of data as for predictive analytics. And we use that to basically understand what is happening this morning, how many cargo is coming in, how many shifts, how many people we have to plan for the shifts to have a stable and solid service for our customers, which is very then predictable and eventually then help you as well to reduce the buffer in your supply chain. So we believe using technology is important, is recommended to invest, and obviously everybody's doing that. But there's also a way to make it practical, as we live in an environment which is very cost driven. It takes time, and for instance, the 5G VLAN technology was too expensive a year ago, and now with new innovations coming out, the price reduced drastically. So that was a decision maker, or the point of decision was reached to invest into the technology. So it's ready for rollout and scalability.
Okay, thank you, Guido.
Thanks.
Okay, the last one is Joe, and Joe Corderola is president of Empire Worldwide, a 3PL. Joe's had extensive experience in purchasing a lot of ocean logistics and one of the experts in the business. And Joe, I'm going to ask you to really speed this up quickly if you can.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Gene, and thanks to the USC for this opportunity. Well, talking about a black swan, what happened in the ocean market was totally unexpected. Rates have almost doubled in 2020 compared to 1 year ago. And when we compare 2020, the year of the pandemic, to the 2008 stock market crash, in 2009, for example, the rate for a 40-foot container from Hong Kong to LA was in the neighborhood of $600, $700. When this year, 2020, it went up to about 4,000. So you can see what a surge in the price. And I think it's similar to the air freight, which Guido made point of. So the question is, what caused this upsurge? We believe there's 3 reasons. One, and the main reason we believe, is the reduced ocean capacity, which is the space available on ships. The carriers adjusted that downward through blank sailings, which is skipping ports or sometimes the whole region. So effectively controlling and decreasing the space available on ships. There was a severe shortages of empty containers overseas. People looking to export goods, they couldn't find empty containers. And also the third one, which is also very important, is the increase of import cargo. And we've seen data during this presentation, how this increase took place. And that has created a major force in the rates going up. Gene, if you can go on the second slide. Okay. So this is what happened with the, looking at the Trans-Pacific specifically. This is from the JOC data. If you see at the bottom, the USA import from Asia, this is compare March to August, it went up to about 90%, when in 2009, the same period was up about 35%. So this major increase in volume, has created big challenges. Operations at ports, in the major ports in USA, they all working at almost full capacity. There is a considerable shortage of chassis that people need to pick up the loaded containers. The trucking industry productivity went down because they have to spend much longer time at the terminals waiting to pick up a container. The repositioning of the empty containers back to Asia or at the export countries. And if the supply and demand continues to be balanced or slightly towards less capacity, we can expect that rate increases to continue to stay in the higher end. Gene, the next one. So what do we expect the rest of the year? So we think ocean volume will continue to grow with holiday merchandise now, so rates will remain high. Retailers will continue to restock inventories. Consumer purchase fewer durable goods during this time and more holiday merchandise, more like on the footwear, fashion, goods, toys. Without any additional fiscal support this year, purchasing power will be adversely impacted. So this is something that has to be watched very, very carefully. Export of USA agricultural products, which is one of the main exports from the United States, is not enough to reposition empty containers back to especially Asia. So in the short term, in summary, I know we're running short of time, so we further overseas space shortages, that's not going away. We continue to have a lack of empty containers. The port congestion will continue to surface. trucking capacity shortfalls, and one that probably many shippers do not like to hear, but rates will remain high through the holiday season. So, Gene, try to do as fast as I could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Work.
I think we're just about done. I've got one last slide to summarize our panel. I'm sorry we ran out of time for questions, but we began with this public health analogy, and through the various panelists, we learned some things that in your supply chain, you can respond to a drowning or as a black swan, and you wait and see, and you respond with more emergency workers, ambulances, or boats. Or you can look ahead and try to face these these rhinos, gray rhinos, charging, and try to adjust. And by adjusting, you avoid and thrive. So those are two important supply chain strategies. We kind of touched a little bit about robust, flexible, and resilient supply chains. And robust supply chains are really those that continue regardless of what the disruption is. And they usually are burdened with a lot of heavy inventory and repetitive processes to keep that supply chain robust. We heard Fernando talk about flexible and how through manufacturing and looking at the risk, you can make your supply chain more flexible. And Andy talked about the resilience that Ansel showed in their supply chain by adjusting the production in a bunch of places and then being able to carry on into the future. So as you begin looking at this approach to these things, it could be one of response and wait for the effect, one of prevention, but you have to have your strategy in place to respond to it. The third thing that we heard about was today's supply chains highly valued or weighted costs, but as Fernando brought out, there is a risk and a cost element, and companies need to make their decision as what they're going to do with that. And I think Greg did a great job in laying out a framework for supply chain management and how to manage that in the future with the new databases based on 5G, the integration, the BI, ML, machine learning, and AI. And then the fourth thing, the importance of security. And I think both Guido and Joe did a great job of kind of laying out how all this data, it responds to the everyday marketplace and how you have to respond quickly to the challenges that present yourself. So hopefully everybody got some new insights out of this. I know I did learn a lot from everybody. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Gene.
Great. Gene, thank you so much. Gentlemen, thank you so much for a great informative session, and thank you for attending our summit. To all the audience out there, it was great to be with you guys virtually, but hopefully next year we will see you in person. So thank you.
We hope so.
This summit. So thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Right on.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right on.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Gene.